Welcome to All in All. You've heard the name, you've definitely seen that iconic, really vibrant cover, maybe you even own a copy. But how deep have you actually gone into the Beatles' Red Hot Peppers' Lonely Hearts Club Band?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this isn't just another album, is it? It's a huge cultural landmark.
Yep.
A real snapshot of a moment that still feels really important today.
That's absolutely right. And today, yeah, we're going to do a proper deep dive into Sea Up Tippers. Our whole mission here is to unpack its really fascinating origins, get a real sense of its deep significance, chart its huge kind of unprecedented impact.
Right.
Look at how people's views of it have, well, changed quite dramatically over the years and figure out its lasting relevance, for us now. We've pulled together insights from, well, all sorts of places to give you a really full picture, but hopefully without, drowning you in information.
Yeah, get ready. Because this dive, it's going to explore those amazing studio experiments that didn't just create new sounds. They basically reinvented how music could even be made. We'll look at some unexpected influences that shaped it, trace the cultural waves it rode, and actually redirect it and try to understand why, more than 50 years on, it's still talked about, rediscovered, and sometimes, fiercely debated. It's a real journey into a masterpiece, an event.
So let's start right at the beginning. Let's pull back the curtain on how this whole phenomenon got started. Its origins, the creative spark. By the middle of 1966, the Beatles were, well, let's be honest, they were completely wiped out, utterly exhausted.
Right.
Just imagine you're stuck in this relentless cycle, constant touring, recording, writing for over 2 years straight. It wasn't fun anymore. It had really become a chore, emotionally draining.
And it wasn't just the physical side of things, was it? They were under this immense pressure from, everywhere. Outside, inside. John Lennon's famous, more popular than Jesus comment. That one comment just ignited this firestorm, didn't it? Especially in the American South, the Christian South.
Oh, absolutely.
It led to boycotts, records being burned in public, just this wave of misunderstanding and intense scrutiny. That must have added a huge weight, right? On top of everything else. Was that pressure a big factor in them, changing things up?
It was definitely a key part of it, yeah. A catalyst. All that external stuff just piled onto their own frustrations, especially with playing live. Performing had become almost unbearable.
Because of the screaming fans?
Exactly. The screaming was just constant, so loud that often they couldn't even hear themselves play, which, made it impossible to perform their newer stuff, which was getting more and more complex. Think about this. Revolver came out during their last tour. Hugely complex album. They didn't play a single song from it live. Not one.
Wow.
The gap between what they could create in the studio and what they could actually pull off on stage had just become this massive canyon, too wide to cross.
So the touring was a dead end creatively and just draining them personally. What was the exact moment, the real tipping point that made them stop? I think it was their very last concert, wasn't it?
Precisely. The absolute turning point was August 29th, 1966. Candlestick Park, San Francisco. That was it. Their last ever proper public concert with tickets and everything. And it wasn't just, the end of a tour. It marked this fundamental, irreversible shift in how they thought about making music. From that point on, their music could be, as someone put it, sculpted in the studio with little thought as to whether the songs could be reproduced in concert. It was a total redefinition of performance for the Beatles. They weren't really a live band anymore. They were studio artists.
And Paul McCartney, he always had a way of summing things up, didn't he? He captured that new idea perfectly.
He did. McCartney famously said, "Now our performance is that record." That statement just elevated the recording itself. It became the ultimate artistic expression, freeing them completely from worrying about playing it live. It opened up this whole new universe of sound possibilities. The only limits were their own imagination and, the skills of their engineers.
Speaking of opening up new worlds, I know Paul McCartney talked a lot about one specific, maybe surprising influence that really, as he put it, flipped him, challenged them.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, that was the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds. McCartney talked about hearing it and just being completely floored, thinking, oh, dear me, this is the album of all time. What the hell are we going to do?
Wow. So it wasn't just liking it, it was like a challenge.
Absolutely. It was this huge musical gauntlet thrown down. It pushed them, spurred them on to stretch their own creative limits further than they ever had before. And what's really fascinating is how one artistic breakthrough can just ignite another one, Pet Sounds had already redefined what you could do in the studio, the kind of emotional depth you could reach in pop music. For the Beatles, especially McCartney, it wasn't about copying it. It was about rising to that challenge. asking, okay, how can we invent something just as groundbreaking? Maybe even more so, something that would redefine the album itself as art.
And that challenge, that drive to reinvent, it led to this brilliant idea, didn't it? Inventing a whole different band, the Slate Peppers band concept. This
Yeah.
was Paul McCartney's core idea, wasn't it? Let's make an album by another band that wasn't us. They call ourselves something else. And just imagine all the time that it wasn't us playing this album. And this fictional band thing, it was actually a big reason it got praised early on as the first concept album. Even if, only a couple of songs really stuck to that story, like the title track With a Little Help from My Friends. The whole clever idea was framing all the songs as this concert by this imaginary band. It gave them a totally fresh angle.
And if you think about it psychologically, it was this really clever way for them to escape the huge pressure, the expectations of just being the Beatles.
Right. Like a disguise.
Exactly. It gave them this kind of creative freedom, like artistic anonymity behind these metaphorical aircheap pepper masks. It let them experiment without the massive weight of being the most famous band on the planet hanging over every single note.
Yeah.
It really shows how committed they were to evolving artistically, even if it meant sort of shedding their famous identity for a short but incredibly creative time.
And what an evolution, especially in the studio. People often say the studio basically became the fifth Beatle for Sarah Peppers.
That's a great way to put it.
The amount of time they spent on it was just unheard of for them. Really shows that new focus. The recording sessions went from late November 66 all the way to April 67, about 700 hours in total.
700 hours.
Yeah. And think about their first album, Please Please Me, famously done in less than 10 hours.
Wow.
So this wasn't just a big leap, it was a complete radical change in how they worked, pouring hundreds of hours into carefully shaping the sound. The recording process itself was the goal.
And that massive time investment is even more amazing when you remember the tech they were dealing with. Escape Peppers was recorded using only 4-track tape machines.
Only 4 tracks for all that complexity.
Yep, just 4. 8-track recorders, which would have given them way more flexibility. They weren't even really common in London studios until late 67, after Pepper was finished.
So how on earth did they get such a layered, rich, complex sound with just 4 tracks?
Well, they got really, really good at using a technique called reduction mixing, sometimes called bouncing tracks. Basically, they'd record multiple instruments or voices onto, say, 2 or 3 of the 4 tracks. They'd mix those down onto just 1 track on a second 4-track machine.
Ah, okay. Freeing up the other tracks.
Exactly. It freed up the other tracks on the second machine for more layers, more overdubs. They kept doing this, bouncing down, freeing up tracks, essentially creating this virtual multi-track studio. It let them build way more complexity than the gear technically allowed. And EMI's Studer J37 tape machines were really key here. They were very high quality, so they minimized the tape hiss and noise that usually builds up when you keep bouncing tracks like that. Kept things clear.
And they weren't just layering sounds, they were manipulating them, processing them in totally new ways, weren't they? Pushing the limits.
Oh, completely. They used compression liberally to control the dynamics, get things loud but smooth. Lots of reverb for that sense of space. Signal, limiting to push the volume without distorting. But beyond that, they were pioneering genuinely new techniques, like direct injection, DI. That was devised by an EMI engineer, Ken Townsend.
Right, I've heard of that.
It let them plug electric instruments, like Paul's bass, straight into the recording desk. No microphone, no amplifier needed for the recording feed. They first used it properly on the Sally Pepper title track, and it gave McCartney's bass this incredibly rich texture and tonal clarity. Really makes it cut through the mix.
Yeah, you can really hear that.
Then there was pitch control, messing with the tape speed to change the pitch and the whole feel of instruments. They experimented with ambiophonics, which was this early attempt to manipulate the sense of space in the sound, and of course the famous one, running voices and instruments through a Leslie speaker.
The rotating speaker thing, usually for organs.
Exactly. That's what gives you those amazing, swirling, dreamy, ethereal effects you hear on tracks like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Just pure sonic experimentation.
It's amazing how their creative drive constantly pushed the engineers to basically invent new stuff, right? To find ways to make the impossible happen.
Totally. And a perfect example of that is Strawberry Fields Forever. Now, that song wasn't actually on the final album.
Right, it was a single.
Yeah. But it was initially meant for the album. It was the very first track they recorded in the Pepper sessions. And according to George Martin, their producer, it set the agenda for the whole album. It established that experimental approach, that sonic density.
And the production on that one song was incredibly complicated, wasn't it?
Unbelievably complex.
Yeah.
Just that one song took an unprecedented 55 hours of studio time.
55 hours for one song.
Yeah, more time than they spent on entire albums just a few years before.
Ah.
But here's the really mind-blowing part. John Lennon had these two completely different versions of the song, recorded in different keys at different tempos.
Okay.
And he decided he wanted to combine them, stitch them together into one seamless piece.
Right, and George Martin said?
Well, George Martin, the expert producer, patiently explained, John, that's technically impossible. The keys won't match. The tempos are different. It just won't work.
But Lennon being Lennon.
Lennon being Lennon, with that absolute belief that anything was possible, just insisted, you can do it. He just had this unwavering faith that they could figure it out.
So what happened? How did they do it?
It led to this incredibly ingenious, groundbreaking solution. The engineers, primarily Jeff Emmerich working with Martin, figured out they could speed up one version just slightly and slow down the other version just slightly. Miraculously, they found a point where the pitches and tempos did match up right in the middle of the song.
No way.
Yeah, they physically cut the tapes and spliced them together at that exact point. It creates this seamless, dreamlike transition that sounds completely natural when you listen, but is real technical feat back then. And that whole process demanding the impossible from the engineers, and the engineers brilliantly finding a way that became a defining characteristic of the Pepper sessions, they were constantly pushing recording tech into totally new places.
But despite how important Strawberry Fields was, there was that decision about it that George Martin later regretted, calling it the biggest mistake of his professional life. What was that?
Yeah. That was EMI, the record label, insisting they release a single before the album. They pushed for Strawberry Fields Forever and Paul's Penny Lane to come out as a double A-side single.
Okay, standard practice then.
Right. And back then, the standard practice was that singles didn't usually appear on the subsequent album. So those two massive, groundbreaking tracks were left off Saty Peppers. Martin, looking back years later, really regretted that decision. He felt the album would have been even stronger, maybe even more acclaimed, if those two foundational tracks had been included. Can you imagine Sgt. Pepper's being even more powerful?
It's hard to fathom, really, given how huge it already was. But okay, if Strawberry Fields set the experimental tone, then maybe A Day in the Life is the ultimate masterpiece of collaboration and production on the album, really showing what happened when Lennon and McCartney's different styles came together.
Oh, absolutely. A Day in the Life is just extraordinary. The structure itself is genius, seamlessly weaving together these unfinished song ideas from John and Paul. Lennon's parts are based on reading the newspaper mundane headlines about an accident, the number of potholes in Blackburn.
4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
Exactly. And then McCartney's middle section shifts into this more personal, dreamlike bit about waking up, falling out of bed, catching the bus. It's this brilliant patchwork quilt that somehow tells this bigger story about, surrealism creeping into everyday life.
And the orchestral part in that song is just monumental, breathtaking. Lennon wanted something huge, didn't he?
He did. He apparently described wanting a tremendous buildup from nothing up to something absolutely like the end of the world, just an incredible image. So they hired 42 musicians, basically half an orchestra, to create those incredible, almost frightening crescendos that link the different sections together.
And George Martin's score for them wasn't exactly traditional, was it?
Not at all. That was pure George Martin genius. Instead of writing out specific notes, he wrote this really rough, unconventional score. He basically just specified the lowest note and the highest note each musician should play within a certain time frame. Then he told them to start really quietly on their lowest note and completely independently of each other, slowly slide up to their highest note over the allotted bars, getting louder as they went.
So controlled chaos.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Controlled cacophony. The result is that absolutely stunning, unsettling, magnificent swell of sound. It's abstract, it's powerful, it's like nothing else in pop music before it. And then, of course, that iconic ending. The four Beatles all gathered around three different pianos, hitting the same E major chord simultaneously. And engineer Jeff Emmerich, manipulating the faders on the console, managed to make that final resonant chord sustain for a full 45 seconds.
Chilling. Just unforgettable.
Truly. A groundbreaking moment.
The amount of sheer tape manipulation just on A Day in the Life alone seems incredible for the time. Really shows how dedicated they were to experimenting with sound.
It was incredibly complex work. For that original session, they actually used 4 separate 4-track tape machines.
4 machines for one song.
Yeah. 2 of those tapes were just for the orchestral overdubs. They were recorded at the same time but separately, and they had to be marked up with this special grease pencil, a chinograph, so they could be synced up perfectly during playback. which, ironically, probably added to that slightly chaotic, untethered feeling of the orchestra. And then another separate tape was used just for that final piano chord, which also had a harmonium layered in. That chord was recorded and mixed down separately, and then painstakingly spliced onto the end of the master tape.
Wow.
Even when Giles Martin did the 50th anniversary remix, he went back and meticulously recreated all those original complexities. It shows just how fundamental those techniques were to the song's unique sound and character. This wasn't just recording songs, it was like sonic sculpture.
Absolutely. And it feels like the whole album was conceived as this total work of art, right? From every angle. The packaging, the visuals, they were just as important as the music.
Totally central to the whole idea. Paul McCartney was really clear about wanting to give people value for money, something substantial. He talked about his own childhood, saving up pocket money to buy LPs, how it was this huge event, taking the bus home, and then spending hours just studying every detail on the sleeve, the liner notes, the photos, everything.
Right.
He wanted to create something that listeners would need a few bus rides to check out. A package that offered this full immersive experience, way beyond just putting a record on.
And you absolutely feel that when you hold the album cover. McCartney's initial sketches, they set the scene, right? The band in uniform, maybe getting keys to the city, surrounded by all these famous faces.
Yeah, those sketches were the starting point. Then he collaborated with his really sharp art dealer, Robert Fraser, the pop artist Peter Blake, and the photographer Michael Cooper. Together, they collaged all these ideas into that image we all know now, that instantly recognizable, iconic cover. And a little detail often missed, they even used wax figures of the Beatles themselves on the cover, borrowed from Madame Tussauds.
Oh, right. The earlier Beatles.
Exactly. Which just reinforces that whole meta-concept of the fictional band performing, blurring the lines between who they were and this character they were playing. Artifice and reality all mixed up.
It's fascinating, too, how they innovated beyond just the music and the front cover. The actual packaging itself was revolutionary for a pop album back then.
It really was. Ski Peppers was one of the very first rock LPs to have a gatefold cover. You know, where it opens up like a book.
Right. That was new.
Yeah, pretty new for rock albums. And it felt special. It gave them this much bigger canvas for artwork, really adding to that event feeling. And the inner sleeve, although it ended up being that photo of them in the colorful uniforms, the original plan was actually for abstract art by this avant-garde Dutch design collective called The Fool. That would have pushed the artistic experimental vibe even further.
And here's a massive first for rock LPs, something we totally take for granted now, but was a really bold move then, printing the lyrics on the back cover.
That's right. A truly groundbreaking decision at the time. And apparently, the music publishing company really objected. They were worried it would hurt sheet music sales if people could just read the lyrics off the back.
Huh. Makes sense, I guess.
But the Beatles, they knew how important the words were becoming in their music, how much more complex the songs were getting. They insisted, and they got their way. And it fundamentally changed how people listened. It let you directly connect the sound on the vinyl with the words on the cover, read along, really engage with the meaning. Simple idea, but profound.
And they didn't stop there. They packed in even more goodies, right? Really pushing that value for money and immersive idea.
They absolutely did. Tucked inside was this sheet of cardboard cutouts, also designed by Peter Blake and his wife Jan Hanworth, and all sorts of fun things.
Yeah.
A stick pepper postcard, a fake mustache like the ones on the cover, sergeant stripes, badges, even a little stand-up figure of the band.
So you could join the band.
Exactly. It wasn't just merch. It was designed to directly involve you, the listener. Let you pretend to be in the band, physically interact with the album's whole concept. Even that message, printed prominently on the packaging, a splendid time is guaranteed for all, directly echoing a song lyric. It just hammered home this idea of the album as an event, a promise of an unforgettable experience. It was this complete, multi-sensory package designed to be explored, enjoyed, even played with.
Okay, so we've really unpacked how this masterpiece was put together, the incredible origins, the creative process. But the story obviously doesn't stop there. Because what Straight Peppers did when it landed was, well, like a cultural earthquake. Its immediate significance, its massive impact on music and society. It was huge.
Yeah.
I mean, the Beatles coming to America in '64, that was already a sea change for popular music, right? But Straight Peppers didn't just amplify that. It completely reshaped the whole landscape, changed the course of pop culture itself.
Indeed. The music itself, critics and listeners at the time described it as being a level beyond almost anything else available. It was so meticulously put together, more complex than anything they'd done, yet still incredibly catchy. Someone described it as being joyous, threatening, absurd, arrogant, determined, innocent, and tough, all at the same time, drawing this clear line, suggesting, this is something that never happened before.
Right.
And their unique group dynamic was key. They wrote almost all their own material, still pretty rare for pop bands then, and all four of them sang lead or harmony vocals. It created this collective power, this synergy that was more than just the sum of its parts, that really defined their sound.
Now let's tackle that concept album label directly. Say Peppers often gets called the first concept album, but as we know, that's not strictly accurate, is it?
That's a really important clarification. Yeah. Well, Grass Peppers definitely popularized the idea within rock music. It certainly wasn't the very first. There were earlier examples, way earlier. Woody Guthrie's albums, for instance, were telling cohesive stories through songs 25 years before Pepper. The Beach Boys' Little Deuce Coupe from '63. Yeah. Clearly a concept album about cars and surf culture.
And soundtracks, obviously.
And soundtracks, exactly. Things like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, way back in 1938. Those functioned as early concept albums, telling a story.
So if it wasn't technically the first, what was its real revolutionary contribution to the whole concept album idea? Why does it get that label?
What Grass Peppers did, and did brilliantly, was it made the LP concept itself front and center in rock music like never before. It wasn't just a collection of songs you happened to buy together. It was designed as this integrated, immersive experience. The whole package, the music flowing together, the amazing artwork, the cutouts, the whole alter ego band playing a show, it all worked together. It established this idea of the album as a total artwork.
Right. The whole thing felt conceptual.
Exactly.
And a big part of that connection, maybe a controversial part, was the whole interplay with drugs and how people perceived the album. Drug references weren't totally new for the Beatles, but with Grass Peppers, they came under this intense spotlight.
That scrutiny just exploded when Paul McCartney made that very candid admission. Just 2 weeks after the album came out, he publicly admitted he'd taken LSD.
Which was huge news then. Shocking.
Absolutely shocking to the mainstream world. And immediately, everyone, listeners, the media, even the authorities, started hunting for drug references all through the lyrics. Whether they were intended or not, it just kicked off this frenzy of interpretation.
And Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds became the poster child for that, didn't it? Because of the LSD acronym theory. Even though John Lennon always insisted, quite charmingly I think, that the title came from a drawing his little son Julian made.
Yeah, he stuck to that story consistently. And Paul McCartney backed him up, saying he remembered seeing Julian's drawing. But once that rumor, that LSD interpretation got out there, it stuck fast. It became indelibly linked. And it wasn't just Lucy. Fans started discovering other drug themes, even if the band never intended them. Henry the Horse, in Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, got interpreted as being about heroin, even though Lennon hadn't even tried heroin at that point.
Right.
The line, fixing a hole, was supposedly about shooting up.
Yeah.
It raises this interesting point. A song's cultural meaning often gets defined by its listeners. So in a way, these became drug songs for many people, regardless of the original intent. The Beatles, intentionally or not, sort of became this conduit for the counterculture's focus on drugs. Their music provided this powerful soundtrack for that cultural shift, even if they weren't consciously trying to push drugs with every single line.
But beyond the drug interpretations, the lyrics also offered some really sharp commentary on society, reflecting the changing times, sometimes satirizing them.
Definitely. Take Lovely Rita. It subtly touches on free love, changing attitudes about sex themes really bubbling up then. It even has that little detail about changing gender roles, with Rita the meter maid paying the bill for dinner.
Small detail, but significant.
Yeah, for 1967. Quite significant. And then, famously, it ends with those heavy-breathing, simulated orgasm sounds incredibly daring for a #1 band on a mainstream album.
Yeah, that was bold.
Then you've got She's Leaving Home, a truly poignant song that just perfectly captured this growing emotional trend. Paul McCartney was directly inspired by a newspaper story he read about a runaway girl. And the song just beautifully articulates that feeling of young people leaving conventional homes, seeking alternative lives, maybe heading to communes. It resonated so deeply with a generation trying to break free from old norms.
And Good Morning took a pretty sharp, almost cynical look at suburban life, didn't it? But with a weird twist of hope.
It did. It really skewered that feeling of suburban torpor, the kind of dull routines and banalities and everyday tragedies of modern urban life. But Lennon's driving sound and that sly irony in his voice, it somehow suggests a bit of hope underneath the drudgery. And that line, I've got nothing to say, but it's okay. Maybe it hints that the real problem isn't middle-class life itself, but maybe the constant pressure to find some grand meaning or order within it.
Interesting take.
Yeah, and if you pull all these threads together, the experimentation, the commentary, the sound, the album, really did arrive at the absolute crest of 60s utopianism. It tapped into a time that genuinely believed in magic and innocence, and the Beatles were like its most playful incarnation. It was in so many ways the defining sound of an era filled with idealism and massive social change.
And the immediate reaction to Sgt. Pepper's was just universal adoration, wasn't it? An instant phenomenon.
It truly was. From the moment it was released, especially in places like Laurel Canyon in California, the heart of the counterculture, people said you could hear it being played from almost every house.
Wow. Just everywhere.
Yeah. Listeners described being completely awed. People said the airwaves were full of magic. It changed everything that came out after its release. For so many people who experienced it then, it was genuinely a once-in-a-lifetime experience, a real cultural big bang. And that immediate critical and popular acclaim got cemented almost instantly when Sgt. Pepper's made history. It was the very first rock album ever to win the Grammy for Album of the Year.
Huge milestone.
Massive. It broke down barriers, helped establish rock music as a legitimate art form in the eyes of the establishment. Its reach, its impact, its sheer ubiquity right from the start were just undeniable.
Okay, that brings us neatly to part 3, the shifting pedestal. This fascinating story of how Sgt. Pepper's perception has changed over time and where it stands today, its relevance now. Because for decades after it came out, Sgt. Pepper's was, well, it was nearly universally considered the greatest album of all time. Not just the best Beatles album, but famously the greatest of anybody.
Right.
It was the undisputed king.
Absolutely. It sat on that top spot for a very long time. A towering monument in music history, no question. However, that perception, like pretty much everything in art and culture, it's definitely evolved. Nowadays, many critics, music historians, even dedicated fans will readily admit that, well, both technically and musically, maybe Sgt. Pepper's does not stand up to other sections of the Beatles' catalog.
Really? Which ones get put ahead of it now?
Often you hear Revolver, the White Album, Abbey Road, even Rubber Soul being argued, often very passionately, as being superior albums overall, which is a pretty significant shift from when Pepper was seen as untouchable.
So what happened? What caused this big shift in opinion, both critically and maybe among fans? How did this once universally worshipped album start getting reevaluated like that?
It seems like a combination of factors came together over time. One really significant thing was the arrival of CDs, especially around 1987 when the Beatles' catalog started coming out digitally. When Revolver was released on CD in the US, crucially, they used the original UK version. The UK version had a stronger track list, and many felt a better mix than the version Americans had known previously.
Okay. So people heard it properly, maybe for the first time.
Exactly. A whole new generation, and even older fans, heard Revolver the way the band intended it. And its sheer brilliance, its innovation, just became undeniable. It slowly but surely started to climb up the critical rankings. For many, it jumped to #1, maybe even pushing Pepper aside as the definitive Beatles statement.
Interesting. And it sounds like Sgt. Pepper's also got tangled up in some of the band's internal politics, especially after John Lennon died.
It did, unfortunately. For a while, Sgt. Pepper's got kind of saddled with being a Paul album.
Why was that a problem?
Well, this happened during a period maybe 15, 20 years after Lennon's death, when Paul McCartney, perhaps unfairly, was seen by some critics and fans as being a bit lame and corny. The less edgy Beatle, maybe.
Right, that perception existed for a while.
And that perception kind of got projected onto Sgt. Pepper's. It didn't help that John himself had occasionally, after the split, sort of bad-mouthed the album, been a bit dismissive of it, and George and Ringo sometimes echoed that slightly. This narrative took hold, even though you have key people like George Martin and the band's official biographer Hunter Davies, clearly stating it was a deep, genuine Lennon-McCartney collaboration with everyone, including George and Ringo, making really vital contributions alongside the production team. But that Paul album tag kind of stuck for a while.
So it's fascinating, isn't it? It's not just about the music in isolation. It's about how these external stories, changing tastes, critical trends, they all shape how we perceive an album. It's like this collective cultural memory that keeps shifting.
Precisely. Tastes aren't fixed. Critical ideas change. Cultural preferences evolve. And they're heavily influenced by what people read, what narratives gain traction, especially now with the internet. You know, a perfect example, kind of mirroring Pepper's journey but in reverse, is the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds Again. For years, mainstream rock critics kind of overlooked it, didn't give it its full due.
Right.
But then, after Paul McCartney started championing it so strongly in the 90s, and critics took a fresh look, it suddenly gained this one of the greatest ever album status. Brian Wilson finally got that widespread recognition he deserved, and even small things, like John Lennon casually dismissing McCartney's Obla-di, Obla-da as granny music, that comment has subtly, over decades, affected how some fans hear that track. It colors their perception.
So, okay, even with these critical reevaluations, maybe questioning its absolute musical supremacy compared to, say, Revolver or Abbey Road, does Sgt. Pepper still hold its unique monumental place in history?
Oh, absolutely. Despite all the nuanced debates about which Beatles album is musically best, SGD Peppers undeniably maintains its place on the pedestal. Why? Because of its staggering impact, its unparalleled role as a cultural phenomenon. The argument you hear again and again is that no band has had that kind of existential impact on a universal scale since SGD Peppers came out. Its significance just transcends the individual songs for so many people. It's about what it did to the world, how it fundamentally changed the whole idea of what an album could be.
And that leads perfectly into its lasting effect on the music industry and this really interesting idea about the loss of monoculture. The argument goes that SGD Pepper's release, paradoxically, helped cause this loss in monoculture precisely because it changed the music industry for good. Can you break that down a bit?
Yeah, it's a fascinating paradox. Monoculture basically refers to that shared cultural space where pretty much everyone is listening to the same hit songs, watching the same few TV shows, experiencing the same big pop culture moments together.
Right, like things maybe felt more unified back then.
Exactly. Before Sgt. Pepper's, pop culture arguably had a much more centralized, shared mainstream. What the Beatles did, especially with this album, was they brought all these previously underappreciated music genres right into the pop mainstream. They wove in bits of soul, blues, traditional Indian music, British music hall, classical flourishes, all into their pop songs. This incredible eclecticism just massively broadened people's concept of what music could be. It diversified the musical diet of the average listener, introducing them to sounds they might never have heard otherwise.
So it wasn't just their sound that expanded, it expanded what was considered possible or acceptable in popular music generally.
Precisely. And their revolutionary use of the studio as an instrument, treating it not just as a place to capture sound, but to create it, that had this huge ripple effect across the whole industry. It wasn't just about recording catchy songs anymore. It was about building entire sonic worlds. This encouraged this explosion of experimentation in sound and lyrics and conceptual albums among countless other artists.
Like who took that cue?
Oh, think about the Who pushing rock opera with Tommy. Think about Pink Floyd's incredible atmospheric soundscapes. David Bowie's whole career built on persona-driven concept albums. Later bands like the Flaming Lips with their psychedelic journeys. Even indie bands like the Strokes. You can trace so much of that ambitious experimental spirit back to the door as Sgt. Pepper kicked open. The Beatles basically showed everyone what was possible.
So it sounds like this powerful wave of innovation ultimately led to a much more diverse but maybe more fragmented musical landscape.
That's the argument. This diversification, this breaking down of old boundaries, eventually led to what some call the splintering of music. And it leads to this intriguing idea that the very release of Sgt. Pepper's means that there can never be another Sgt. Pepper's.
What does that mean exactly?
It means that because Pepper helped fragment the audience and broaden taste so much, it's almost impossible for any single album today to achieve that same level of universal influence, cultural recognition, and sheer mass popularity across virtually all demographics and generations. The kind of monolithic cultural moment it represented just can't really happen in the same way in our current media world, with all its niches and algorithms.
People try to find modern comparisons, right? Albums that had a huge cultural impact.
Yeah, people definitely try. You hear albums like Michael Jackson's Thriller mention massive global sales, broke racial barriers on MTV, or Kendrick Lamar's To Pimp a Butterfly, huge cultural impact, a powerful concept album for its time. Or maybe Radiohead's Kid A for its artistic ambition and radical shift in sound. But while all those albums were hugely influential in their own ways, the consensus is often that none quite matched Sgt. Pepper's specific kind of universal, cross-generational, almost existential impact. The sheer scale of its cultural penetration was just different, a product of a unique time in media history that's gone now.
But even though that exact historical moment can't be repeated, the album itself keeps getting reinterpreted, re-experienced by new generations. That 50th anniversary remix in 2017 sounds like a great example.
It's a perfect example of its continuing life. Yeah, for the 50th anniversary in 2017, George Martin's son, who's a fantastic producer in his own right, he put out 4 different new versions of the album. The most significant was a completely new stereo mix.
And why did it need a new stereo mix?
Well, the thinking was really interesting. Back in '67, the Beatles themselves spent about 3 weeks meticulously focused on getting the mono mix perfect. The whole band was there, deeply involved. But the original stereo mix, famously, it was done in just 3 days, mostly without the band even present. And Giles Martin points out it had some pretty significant major flaws by modern standards. Songs playing at slightly the wrong speed, instruments panned really hard left or right in that primitive stereo way that sounds a bit jarring now.
Okay. So the new stereo mix wasn't just cleaning it up. It was trying to get closer to maybe what they would have wanted.
Exactly. Giles used the original mono mix, the one the band obsessed over, as his main guide, his template. The goal was to create this stereo mix that maybe the band would have wanted 50 years ago if they'd given the stereo version the same intense focus. So it was kind of an act of restoration, but also innovation, trying to push boundaries sonically while staying true to the original spirit. And it's funny, John Lennon himself always said the mono version was the only proper way to hear the album. He saw that as the definitive version.
Beyond remixes, the album's been brought to life in even more modern, immersive ways too, hasn't it? Using new tech.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like in December 2019, Tate Liverpool and National Museums Liverpool launched this thing called Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, The Immersive Experience. They presented it in Dolby Atmos surround sound.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a worldwide first for the album, using that kind of spatial audio tech. The idea was to totally enhance the listening experience, make you feel completely surrounded by the music, like you're actually inside the soundscape. It's just another way art keeps getting reimagined.
And the tributes just keep coming, right? Shows that Pepper is still inspiring musicians today across all sorts of genres.
Oh, definitely. The album sparked countless tribute albums and performances over the years. Everything from Sgt. Pepper Knew My Father, which was this cool charity compilation the NME magazine put together back in '88 with bands like The Fall and Wet, Wet, Wet.
Right.
To a band called Big Daddy doing a version in 1992 where they hilariously reimagined the whole album in 50s rock and roll styles.
Ugh. That sounds fun.
And then the Flaming Lips did their own full album cover in 2014 with a little help from my friends with lots of guest artists. Even BBC Radio 2 did a big 40th anniversary show in 2007. They got contemporary artists like Oasis and the Killers to record new versions of the songs. And get this, it was produced by Jeff Emmerich, the original engineer, using EMI's original 4-track gear.
No way! That's amazing.
Yeah, a really powerful testament to the album's enduring magic and how adaptable those songs are.
All this constant reinterpretation and just the enduring love for the original, it really underlines how important the album art still is, doesn't it? Even now, in our digital world, you see that cover, you instantly know what it is.
It absolutely does. That incredibly influential artwork for Sgt. Pepper's really highlights the continuing, maybe even growing importance of album covers. For marketing, for building an artist's brand, for instantly signaling genre and artistic intent. Even when it's just a tiny thumbnail on your phone screen, a strong visual identity is still crucial. Sgt. Pepper's reminds us of that whole tactile, visual experience that used to be so central to how we consumed music, and how powerful that visual element can still be.
And so finally, we arrive at this idea of the enduring dream. The album's broader relevance, its connection to that whole 60s counterculture moment, it was tied up with these big ideas of utopianism, these Edenic myths of building a better world.
Yeah, and looking back, we know those utopian dreams were often pretty ephemeral, weren't they? They dissipated almost before they had time to form. John Lennon captured that feeling perfectly in his 1970 song God with that stark line, "The dream is over," marking that shift from the optimism of the 60s to a more cynical reality.
Right.
However, even if the dream was fleeting, for that brief, incredibly intense moment in time, the sheer cultural power of the Beatles was able to fundamentally shift the foundations of American culture and arguably Western culture more broadly. And that profound, even if temporary shift that's still part of Sgt. Pepper's practical relevance today. It stands as this powerful reminder of music's incredible ability to transform society, to inspire whole generations, and to capture the deepest hopes and feelings of an era.
So after diving this deep, what really stands out to you most about Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band? Is it the sheer raw innovation they achieved in the studio? Is it the timeless quality of the songs themselves? Is it that cultural earthquake it triggered, the way it just shook the world? Or is it more about its complicated, shifting legacy that still gets debated and rediscovered even now?
And maybe think about this. In our world today, where music feels so fragmented, where we often listen through algorithms, and that amazing album art often gets shrunk down to just a little square on a screen, does Ace Peppers remind us that maybe truly transformative art needs more than just great music? Does it need that whole immersive, multisensory event, that complete package to really experience?
And can that kind of all-encompassing cultural event ever truly happen again in the same universal, game-changing way?
Thanks for listening to All in All.